we don't need a Ferrari to go and buy groceries. You can take a cycle, go to the store and buy groceries, unless the problem or the need that you're trying to solve is the fact that everybody should know you have a Ferrari. So that's one. And then the other thing is, for all the talk of you can't go online to any social media without some influencer trying to tell you that if you learn these 50 AI tools, your life's going to change, right? For all of that, I think true application of AI is still very complex.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Nanonets podcast. Nanonets is an AI platform transforming how enterprises reimagine their processes. I'm Anirudh Patri. I'm a GTM leader at Nanonets and an AI enthusiast. Today, I have with me Sayantan Datta, who's an SVP, global process leader at Diageo, a company that a lot of us may not be familiar with, but they own all the brands that we are familiar with, like Guinness, Tanqueray, Captain Morgan, and so on and so forth. So thanks for joining us today, Sayantan. Looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, Anirudh. You missed out Johnnie Walker. That's the most
Johnny,
prolific.
of course, of course. Thanks for bringing that up. Great. So just to set the stage, today's conversation is going to be about AI, and I'll let Sayantan open the floor with what is automation to you and how do you see it evolving and how has it changed the world over the past couple of years?
So automation has gone through several generations, right? And most of that is available in different terminologies and different literature. But the way I've seen it through the experiences I've had early on in my career, automation used to mean simple things like building Excel macros on mainframe screen scraping um, foundations, right? It's come a very long way in the last 15, 17 years since that very humble beginning to a point where we now can have conversations that would have been sci-fi even 10 years ago, right? In terms of immersive technologies, in terms of what and how much AI can do. So in my mind, automation is really about doing things better and creating better experiences rather than sort of doing away with stuff, right? If I'm doing something that doesn't make sense to do, just automating away doesn't eliminate it. I would much rather eliminate it and use automation to drive better experiences for customers, stakeholders, employees, everybody else around.
Got it. Got it. That's a great answer. So you brought out the point that automation has been there forever. People were thinking of automation as an Excel macro in the past, and maybe at some point, IPA was everything that there was to do with automation. But what does automation look like today? Why is it so different from what it was 5 or 10 years ago?
So there are multiple reasons for that that to happen. So number one is we've created more marketing wrappers around the idea of automation. And that I think is one of the things that has created the amount of hype and the amount of focus that automation has generated successfully through marketing campaigns, making it into something that you must have, right? It's the cool thing. You're not invited to the cool kids table without having a point of view on automation. So that is one aspect of what has created this amount of noise or this amount of focus on automation. And then the other part is technology, at least in the last 10 or so years. Even, I mean, let's start from the evolution of blockchain, sort of milestone, at least the way I see it. And from that point on to now, which is a very short span of about 10, 12 years, you've created technologies that allow you to do things at a scale which never made business case sense in the past, do things at a speed which was never possible in the past, and do things with skill sets that don't require you to be rocket scientists, right? So you don't need to be a rocket scientist to create automation, right? Simple email flows, etc. You can pretty much create in no-code environments all on your own. So those are sort of the positives that have happened with automation in terms of the technologies that have come to be, in terms of the amount of sophistication that some of these technologies bring with them.
So you mentioned a lot about marketing and a lot about noise. And I think a lot of people are struggling with the same problem where there are new offerings, both from your legacy players such as a UiPath or a Blue Prism, as well as the young startups. Everyone saying, we'll put XYZ process on autopilot. This is a workflow automation that takes care of XYZ end to end, right? So how do you cut through all this noise? Because every single day there's something new happening. There's a new way of doing things. How do you put the noise aside and then focus on what's actually important at Diageo?
Diageo. So it's not Diageo, but if you look at any organization, that noise is almost ubiquitous now. Everybody is talking about automation. You would have seen in the last few minutes or so, I didn't bring up the word AI. And there's a
That's
reason for
correct.
that. Because it, the way AI is being sold today, or the way we think about AI, it's almost like we have in our heads the architecture and the painting of the solution that we want, and now we want to go looking for a problem, right? And I think the best way to cut through all of this noise, and the organizations who've really successfully deployed true AI, not glorified RPA boards, have started with the problem statement, have started with the need. If you start with what I really need to get done, if you start with what outcomes that a solution is going to deliver, it's very easy to cut through the noise, because then you're not having a conversation that starts with the idea of features. You're having a conversation that starts with needs and outcomes. You then go on to features and then quickly move to, therefore, the benefits are what they are. If you start to have a conversation on features, that's when all the noise starts to cloud you, because any technology or any product player, any platform in the market tends to lead with features. Everybody is talking about today, for example, agentic AI is the thing. 15 minutes ago, it was just generative AI. All of these, in the conversations that they have, in the language that they speak, is largely features. I can do this, I can do that. My technology is better than my neighbor's technology, because nobody's talking about, here's a problem that I can help you solve. That's, I think, where we need to get to be able to cut the noise.
So I just wanted to ask you about how you think of a certain process. Let's say we take contract lifecycle management, right? How do you look at automating a process?
So when I approach transformation, right, and when I talk transformation today with stakeholders, erstwhile in my career with various clients, it's always been about starting zero base, right? Let's start from the point of what would be ideal if I had to manage contracts, right? What would be ideal is I would never have to touch the contract document at all, right? I would have a certain set of characteristic parameters, objectives, boundaries that I could jot down on a piece of paper. And then I start executing those boundaries, etc., with my customer. My customer also pretty much thinks the same, right? From a contracts perspective, there are two or three things that a customer really wants. And I'll stick to the demand side of things because I'm largely an order to cash person. A customer wants the price that we've agreed to reflect against the products that we've agreed to buy, right? Format that's okay with me. That's what my customer wants. That's the need, right? Now, think about how I can make that happen. So there are three aspects to, therefore, the process. One is, what is the underlying data that I'm dealing with, and how can I make the cleanest data possible for both myself and my customer? So that's sort of almost at the foundation of everything is the data. The second layer to this is, what are the steps or milestones or building blocks that go from me jotting down notes on a piece of paper to be able to create a living document that both of us agree and interpret on equal basis. That's what most people understand as the process. And then lastly, right at the top is, how do I want myself, and more importantly, my customer, to experience that living document or that living data? So you see that there's sort of like three layers of outcomes that I want to drive. What is the most accurate version of the data, accuracy? What are the various milestones that I have to go through to get to a version of the document that all of us interpret in the same language? Consistency, integrity. And then how do I ensure the best experience for my customer? When we talk about automation, or when you talk about transformation, you have to look at all of these three layers, right? And preferably start at the very top and then work your way downwards, right? Here's the experience I want to deliver. Here's how it works or should be working to deliver that experience. Here's what I need in terms of data and transaction documentation to make that experience happen. If you work like that, you're addressing the whole problem. You're going needs, then you start looking at features. Okay, I got a bunch of tools in the market who do contract lifecycle management. Some of them also bring a CRM system, some of them bring a trade investment system, some of them are just pure and plain contract lifecycle management systems. What are the features that I really need, and where do I find the maximum benefit of those features? And then lastly, before I implement, what needs to be true? And the answer is pretty much always universally data, right? What needs to be true for that solution to work, right? I address that first. That's how you think about transformation to make it successful. Otherwise, you spend millions of dollars, you start with something really super cool looking, you get to a point and then something else distracts you. Today it's agentic AI, tomorrow it's going to be something else AI, and I'll get distracted and go to my next experiment. And over a period of time, organizations end up with a stack of these innovations, right? None of which really work properly. Each of them was somebody's brilliant idea at some point in time, a solution looking for a problem. None of it ever got completed.
That's absolutely right. I think execution is all that
Mhm.
matters. Since you brought up the point of data, so data seems to be one of the biggest challenges in actually being able to automate a certain process, right? So, just in your perspective, how is it that you overcome this problem of data? I think all large enterprises with multiple brands and multiple acquisitions have the problem of data. How is it that you overcome this problem? And what are the other challenges that you see when you try to automate a process?
I'm going to say something that a lot of people will disagree, possibly disagree with, but if you really look deep, you know it's true. Data is a living problem, right? And I think for too long we've been trying to solve data as a problem, right? It's not something you'll solve with a finite journey. Because over periods of time, businesses will change. Over a period of time, the landscapes will change. And therefore the data continues to evolve, right? The nature of the data, what data is coming in, what data needs to go out, what that needs to look, how a customer is interacting with the business, how the business is interacting with itself, how the new generation of workers is interacting with my technology. Everything is generating new kinds of data every day, right? So if you try and solve it as a finite journey in terms of next 2 years, I'm going to solve all my data problems. It's the reason we never get to solve any of our data problems, right? So it's not about solving the data problem or solving for data. It's about realizing what the shortcomings or what the gaps in my data are and how I can best use what I have to deliver the outcome that I have, because data will continue to evolve. Do I then have a framework to continuously do that, to continuously keep assessing what's the gap in the data? What should the data look like? And to continuously keep enriching that, to continuously keep improving on my current version of truth rather than chasing that unicorn or single source of golden records, which we never get to, right? I mean, we've been trying to do a single source of golden record since I remember, since I was in engineering college and we used to talk about SCADA systems. I was an electrical engineer. So when we talk about SCADA systems, we used to talk about there should be a single place where all of the data, consumer data has to be stored. Never got there. So here we are. I mean, and then we need to rethink this in terms of how do I make data continuously evolving, continuously enriched object rather than a problem that I need to solve. And
Understood.
to your other question, in terms of what some of the other challenges are typically in organizations, and I've seen this across, right? So this is again not very unique to Diageo, although in Diageo we tend to think everything we do is very unique. That itself is the problem, is a cultural problem we need to solve, right? Because if we think that we are different to every other business in the world, and therefore the solution for me has to look different to every other solution in the world, we'll never get to a solution, right? We just keep trying new features every day. So we need to break out from this culture of inertia that says my business is so unique, nothing will work for me. Because if you break it down to the piece that we were talking about earlier, right? Foundation of data, what are the milestones at the point in the process, and what is the experience I want to deliver? Pretty much all businesses have 60 to 70% of their foundations look the same, right? So start with that as a problem statement and try and solve that from a cultural perspective. We'll make immense amount of progress. And the last thing is, and this is something that we are currently doing in Diageo as well, is we got to focus on what's important and sort of finish one thing that we start before jumping to the next thing. Most organizations are, for the last 5, 7, 10 years, they've been in a sort of transformation fatigue, right? There's way too much going on. At any given point in time, there are 17 or 20 different priorities that you got to focus on. And everybody's tired because the number of resources, it's not that you can keep adding infinite amount of people to the business, but you keep adding infinite, sort of threads of transformation into the business. And we don't focus on, here are the 5 things that I really need to get done, instead of, trying to do a moderate to average job on 50 different things. That, I think, is one of the big challenges that most organizations struggle to overcome in the present day of all of this automation and transformation noise.
It's funny you said that because I was a consultant previously and I've spent a significant tenure of my working life as a consultant. And my main job would be to tell them what can they change. And we'd always come up with, 100 different things for enterprises to implement. And like you mentioned, it's obviously absolutely critical to be able to boil down those 50 into maybe five. Maybe those 50 aren't even necessary in the first place, right? Like these marginal improvements may not even be required, but those five key transformation projects that you need to work on. How do you think, what is the right way to actually get from those 50, the list of 50 projects, to the top five that will create maximum change in your company? How do you boil that down?
If I look at any part of my business and I can come up with 50 things to improve in that part of the business, we need to get rid of that part of the business, right? If there are 50 things that can change in that part of the business, whatever that is, right? If it's, let's say, you go into an accounts payable or you go into an accounts receivable sort of shop, and you say, here are 50 things you can change, which means there's something horribly going on wrong in that operations, and we got to rethink the entire design. And I'll keep going back to that. Look, I'm a process guy. I've been a process guy all my life. So I keep coming back to the fundamentals of this thing, that if you start with the need, right? What is it that I need to deliver out of a process? What is it that I need to deliver out of a transaction? And what do I need to make that experience or that outcome real? You automatically reduce 50 things down to 5. Most of my conversations, I'll take a very, very narrow example of the thing, right? So let's think about cash applications as a process. Very, very narrow microcosm of the whole world. And we think about cash applications, and you go to any average organization, you can come up with 10 or 12 different things. You don't have the right customer hierarchy, therefore your subledgers are not arranged correctly. You're getting payments from multiple banks for the same customer. So you need to have small bits and pieces of things that you got to fix. But nobody stops to ask the question, what do I really need out of cash applications? What's the purpose of doing cash applications? When we start asking that question, we realize that the purpose is not to do it automated. The purpose of doing cash applications is not about solving my customer hierarchy problem. The purpose of doing cash applications is maintaining a clean book of records. And then you begin to see that the solution to this problem actually sits much upstream. It sits in, how can I enable my customer to make payments and provide me information in such a way that cash applications doesn't need human effort. Most of us, we think about automation as the first step of automation. What is it going to do? It's going to eliminate a lot of the tactical transactional work, low value work. If I have that much of low value work, my entire organization is operating on a foundation of non-value add. So let's first focus on reducing that, which is not necessary. And that automatically brings down your 50 things down to 5. I need to deliver a clean book of records so that the money that is coming in can be accounted. Why? Because that will help me service my customer better. That will help me live up to regulatory and compliance needs better. And that will just generally help me close my books faster. Now, what do I need to do that? Possibly 3 or 4 things. And that's it. Those are the 3 or 4 things we got to do absolutely right. Instead of looking for, I have a cash applications platform solution, agent, entity, whatever. And now let me go look for problems that the various features in that solution can solve, right? That's how we end up with 50 things.
I feel that way about my wardrobe as well. If I have way too many things I'm not using, then I don't have the right things. Scrap it all and then, redo my wardrobe so I don't have to think a lot for the things I don't need to think about a lot.
Always zero base.
Yes. So I brought up that analogy because I've spoken to a lot of people from enterprises, process leaders, people from CIO office, etc. And a lot of times I see a lot of reluctance to do zero base, right? So for example, I have a Workday contract. I've spent so much on Workday for their CLM software. I have so many people from Workday. I have these had it implemented by Deloitte and I have 50 dedicated resources for this. I can't scrap my entire team, right? So how difficult is it for an enterprise to actually go zero base when they're thinking of a process?
It's extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to. It's like you're a child and you've done something wrong, and you know you're gonna get sound speaking up from your parents if they get to know. So now you're caught in the dilemma of, should I tell them I've done something wrong, or should I do some more wrong things to cover up the old wrong? And it basically comes down to that human behavior thing. I made a choice, right? And that choice didn't work out. Yeah. Now, should I keep investing in making good money go after wasted money? I wouldn't even say bad money. Sometimes it's just wasted money. Or do I restart by saying, all right, I failed. Let's all accept that it was something that we did wrong and then move on from there, right? I think it's a huge cultural shift that we need, because we talk a lot about these days experiment and fail fast, and how can we get more agile, and how can we sort of create small bits of success and all of the other stuff that comes with this innovation story or innovation context. But we don't really encourage that as a culture, right?
This might be a silly question, but is there a world where maybe that was the right decision at that point, but given the pace of innovation, given the rate of change, the answer today looks completely different from the answer you had 5 years ago or whenever you actually originally bought that piece of software?
Yeah, but you see, the problem is in the way that question is shaped, and it's not your problem. That question is asked in exactly the same way everywhere. The mistake we made is not in selecting the right or the wrong software. The mistake that we've made is in trying to solve the problem. What is the problem that I'm solving? What's the need of doing that ERP? Think about it, right? What does an ERP provide? The ERP provides a foundation of data, right? With some basic processes and basic transaction interactions that ensure that that data is continuously relevant and accurate. When I start using ERP to drive automation, when I start using ERP to drive customer experience, when I start using ERP as my AI solution, those are the decisions where I have features chasing for needs rather than needs going after features, right? So whether I chose SAP or Oracle or Workday or JD Edwards at one point in time or something else, MFG Pro if I'm in the manufacturing space, that wasn't the wrong decision. I think that the decision was mistaken in terms of what is the problem I'm trying to solve, right? If just keeping good accounting records is the problem, then let's solve that problem, which all of these softwares do it with equal aplomb. It's not that Oracle is brilliantly better than SAP or Workday is brilliantly worse than SAP in maintaining a basic accounting records, right? If that's this problem solving, let's pick one and solve that problem instead of, well, now I'm going to use this to solve this and that, and everything has to be absolutely in my ERP. Otherwise, I'm creating parallel data, and therefore I'm going to create a data problem, and then everything else sort of that leads from there.
Got it. Great. So I think I'm hearing multiple issues regarding adoption of AI. If
Mhm.
you had a magic wand and you could make any changes to a company that you want to do, you can reimagine the way the company was structured. What would it do to make AI and automation, the adoption of these new technologies, the ability to innovate day after day, super easy for you?
Two things, right? And since you're giving me the magic wand, let me use it for at least two things, right? One is I would change the culture and the lens through which people look at AI, right? And this again stems from the fact that I'm a process guy, right? My first client engagement, I was making a process map for the client, right? So that's where sort of genesis of what I do comes from. We have to change the lens through which we look at AI, especially in the IT world, that AI has the ability to come and solve business problems. AI cannot solve business problems. Business has problems because a business is set up in a certain way. It has a set of customers who behave in a certain way. It has a set of market regulators that it has to interact with in a certain way. So I need to make sure that I look at AI as something that will help me solve the business problem faster. So enable the solution rather than become the solution. I keep saying this, right? We don't need a Ferrari to go and buy groceries. You can take a cycle, go to the store and buy groceries, unless the problem or the need that you're trying to solve is the fact that everybody should know you have a Ferrari. So that's one. And then the other thing is, for all the talk of, I mean, you can't go online to any social media without some influencer trying to tell you that if you learn these 50 AI tools, your life's going to change, right? For all of that, I think true application of AI is still very complex, right? Average guy like me who doesn't understand how to code cannot implement AI. I still marvel at the miracle of pivot tables. So for me to implement AI, there is a huge gap between where my skill level is, and I'm just a representation of a very big bell in the bell curve, right? And where I can start actually thinking about AI as a productive outcome driver, there's a huge gap. If I have a magic wand, I try to close that gap so that the average semi-skilled guy who has a lot of common sense and familiar with a computer maybe is able to leverage AI to make their lives better. That's where we need to get to, right? That's when you start to see adoption. That's when you start to see better uses of AI. Because the guy who's doing accounting on the ground, if he cannot leverage AI, if you need an entire IT army to come and tell you, okay, here's how you need to use this particular tool which has AI in the back of it. The guy doesn't adopt, and then you wasted a lot of money driving a Ferrari to the grocery store.
Of course, of course. And I think the point that you made about, being able to use AI as a regular person becomes very important, because there is something today that I see which might have been very similar to something in the late 90s, where everyone was trying to upskill themselves on learning how to use an ERP. Oh, I'm certified by SAP, I'm certified by Oracle. And today I see a lot of, I'm certified by Google as an AI user. But as you mentioned, I think unlocking the ability for everyone to use AI in the company and
Yeah.
increasing their own productivity is a very fresh lens to look at it. I think the world's going backwards in the sense that they're treating AI like this, this tool that they can come and just do anything with. But not everyone is capable of using
Yeah.
that tool. And yeah, pivot tables, as you mentioned, I still marvel at it. It's been marveled at for the for the longest time now. No one's probably ever
Exactly.
going to get rid of it. But since you come to the topic of making AI more accessible, right? Do you have a take on how do you think these, the next gen companies like OpenAI or Anthropic can make AI more enterprise friendly? As in, you'll encourage more people from your team to try and leverage these tools on their day to day to increase their own productivity.
I'm going to begin to sound like a broken record right now. I think if you really see a company that is successful with AI, and not just successful in terms of generating valuation and getting funding from VCs, etc., genuinely successful with AI, organizations keep focusing on experience. They keep focusing on, so what? I got this brilliant new AI feature. So what? We got to start creating propositions for everyday use, propositions which make our life simpler. Because so for all of this conversation of AI, right, I, on a daily basis, in particularly my role, I face an exceptional problem of accounting that they haven't made an AI for, and they haven't conceptualized an AI. Some of these problems are incredibly rare because they will happen once in a lifetime, right? There was this customer I was working on in a past life who mid shipment, the customs regulation in the receiving country changed. So now there's an entire container full of cases of products sitting in a harbor somewhere, and people are trying to figure out that if they actually just had to throw this overboard, throw it into the ocean, who's gonna who's gonna own the credit note and the accounting entry for that, right? It's a sort of once in a 5 year kind of situation that something like this will happen. You don't have AI for this, so you got to think about how can therefore I create solutions that predict such occurrences, that prepare me for such occurrences, right? And those are business problems. Instead of thinking about, okay, there is somebody who's got a bunch of swivel chair activity, copying data from here and pasting data over there. I can do that with an Excel macro. I don't need AI to do that. But the problem is most of these organizations, they're creating AI to do that. And I copy data from here and paste it there. I have a zillion emails. Can I create summaries and then summaries of summaries and then summaries of summaries of summaries of those emails, right? The business problem is, how can I reduce the number of emails? I can get in a room and have a conversation, solve the problem. So there you go. I think we got to stop chasing valuations and actually start chasing value.
So I think in the past you've spoken about human augmented design and where AI and tech should adapt to unpredictable human behavior and not the other way around where we are trying to figure AI out. What are two, three things that two, three suggestions of yours on how you can possibly make this happen where AI is sort of adapting to you and not the other way around?
I think we got to first accept the fact that there is a scenario, there is a context in which human beings will act rationally. It's a very difficult thing to explain to an audience who's really bullish about, AI can predict everything and, sort of solve everything. But a human being can choose to operate differently for the same event on subsequent days. Today, I might decide to carry an umbrella into the rain. Tomorrow, I might decide to wear a raincoat into the rain. And on day three, I might just feel like going back to my childhood and getting wet. Now, start thinking about the pyramid of unpredictability that builds up, right? So, in that tiny slice of decision making, I take a decision that changes based on which side of the bed I woke up in the morning. Based on that decision, there are two more people taking decisions and four more people taking decisions. And as long as human beings are making the decision, hopefully that will continue in the distant future and we won't have AI taking decisions for us, because that's scary. None of us need Skynet to happen. But if you keep building that up, you're trying to use AI to solve a problem that is inherently unpredictable. And when that results in an exception, right, which is what AI is supposed to predict with 90% accuracy, that exception needs human intervention to solve, because the solution doesn't have one answer. The solution can have three, four, five different answers. Each of those answers has a merit and a demerit. So the final receiver of the decision has to be able to take a call on which decision he or she is most comfortable, right? Instead of having agents sitting in different parts of the organization trying to talk to each other and coming to the decision. How do we create AI that accepts or that has that unpredictability of human decision making built into its design, instead of just having more and more sophisticated neural nets and prediction models built into it? How do I ensure that I make space for the fact that the entire prediction could be wrong? And then how do I mitigate that? Because otherwise, what's happening is today, most of the conversation on AI is, I can look at all of the historical data and predict a 90% probable decision for a human agent to click on enter or sort of hit enter on the keyboard, which means you're now trying to push a machine made decision into the choices of human life. Sounds very, very theoretical and philosophical, but when you start doing that, you run into the adoption problem, because you're making choices for a different human being. And the
Yeah.
moment you start, sort of going into that space, there are a lot of resistance that comes in terms of accepting the outcome. Especially in organizations which are not native sort of digital, right? Organizations which are still built on a foundation of brick and mortar and built on a foundation of physical stuff, right? These organizations have complexities based on a lot of human decisions built on one another. Over there, the person who's sitting in the warehouse knows the problem of being able to fetch product from one particular aisle, with different labels on it. You can use AI, but if you force AI onto that person is just going to push back. That's what
Yeah.
I mean when I say that you need to have human augmented design instead of AI augmenting human beings. You need human beings augmenting the effectiveness of AI, and you got to make space for that decision making. And that's where I think the future of work really is. Yes, you'll eliminate writing the legal brief. Yes, you'll eliminate writing the contract. You cannot eliminate the human element, because at the end of the day, the consumption of whatever that AI is coming up with is sitting with a human being. That's it. That's my the way I approach it. It also kind of, that's where the whole idea of start with what the need is, what the need of the human being who's consuming the end product is, right? And then build backwards from that instead of building to it, where I got this remarkable set of features that is based on 10,000 sort of line items of data, and therefore your need should be X. Right? Defies all sort of marketing lessons, and Philip Kotler would be turning in his sleep and everything, that you've completely changed the meaning of what need and want is.
Definitely, definitely. Since we're on the topic of humans, taking big decisions and a lot of work being automated by AI and, humans doing crucial points. In the future, what do you think is like the skill set? Let's say the next person who has to fill in your shoes, what do you think is the skill set that they will have to build over, say, the next couple of years to ensure that they are in the right position in the company, to keep working, let's say, or maybe even a young college grad, right? What should he think of? Because if his job is to just, maybe do pivots, maybe 2 years later, there'll be someone else doing a podcast, and those guys are like, hey, I have pivots all figured out. Doesn't boggle me at all, right? So, what are the kind of skills people have to develop today to not be redundant tomorrow?
I marvel at my parents' generation, right? People who are in their 70s, maybe even touching early 80s, who are able to make UPI payments in India from their smartphones, right? Think about what was high technology when they started at the age of 16 or 17. You had the wired phone that came in their lives, television, FM radio, right? And now they are touching on smartphones that can do massive amounts of computation, right? What was the one skill that allowed them to go from a television where you had a knob turning to change your channels, and you had like what, 7 channels at best you could get, to consuming media, entertainment, news, everyday experiences on a smartphone, right? Or even having a point of view, or being able to drive, if you're really good at it, an autonomous car, let's say today, right? Adaptability, right? That's the one skill that you need. What can happen with all of this very fast paced change is people getting overwhelmed, because all of this change comes with fear. I generally tend to fear what I don't understand. So my ability, if I, as is generally not taught as a skill, my ability to adapt, my ability to learn and apply. Most of the times, I look at teams, I look at people working on organizations, they're waiting for somebody to come and tell them, here's how you need to change for tomorrow. Here's this certification course you need to do on this particular technology. It's going to happen more and more frequently. So, my ability to adapt to that demand, my ability to adapt to the idea of continuous fast paced change, my ability to learn and apply new things. That's the skill, right? You don't need to learn AI, you don't have to be a math superstar to, sort of live in the future. You don't need to know how to code even. Hopefully my magic wand's going to work, and it'll get simpler. But you really need to be able to learn, adapt, and not get overwhelmed, right? That's, I keep saying that, let's move away from saying why not full stop or why not period, to an environment where why not is followed by a question mark. That mindset shift is what you need in the future employee.
Yes, and I think this also goes back to the cultural shift you were talking about that enterprises need to embrace to be, evolving at the same rapid pace. And since we're on the topic of evolution and adapting and evolving, 10 years down the line, right? We know that the world's been changing like crazy. 3 years ago, there was, ChatGPT 3. Today you have O3 and all of that. 10 years down the line, or if you want to push it, let's say 50, how do you think a company of the future, the size of Diageo, would look like? What is the role of humans in that company? What is the role of technology and AI in that company?
It's a very difficult question to answer, because it means thinking about how the world's going to change 10 years, 15 years, 50 years. And when you think about the world, there are elements of how will the world's politics change? How will the world's geography change? How will sort of regulatory instruments work? How would we finally be operating on one currency worldwide? Would we completely shift onto cryptocurrencies rather than having physical money anymore? So it's very difficult to predict what it's going to look like 10, 20, 50 years, because if you were sitting 10 years before today, would you be predicting that, Minority Report would really look like, oh, this is such a boring thing, right? If you go back and watch Minority Report, at the time when we did watch that movie, it was wow, right? It is not that, I mean, Mr. Musk is talking about putting chips in your head. So it's not that extraordinary to think about Minority Report and the tech that was shown there. But what I do think is going to change in the way organizations operate gradually and hopefully is we're going to start moving towards focusing more and more and more on experiences, right? We're a long distance away from that being real, but at least we're talking about it continuously, right? We are talking about experience as an outcome that equals efficiency and effectiveness, right? And I think most future human beings are going to be enabled to provide, to spend most of their times trying to make up and provide that hyper customized experience. What does good experience mean for you versus me should not be the same. It should be different. Right? Because that's one of the things that should come from all of this technology is we have to start expecting better and better and better for ourselves as we grow with technology. So therefore, what is my experience of, I don't know, eating an ice cream versus your experience of having an ice cream will be completely different. And most human beings will be focused on making sure that that experience can be provided to you on demand rather than me submitting it in a focus group and then companies going into innovation and coming up with the idea 10 years down the line. The speed of innovation becomes real time. The speed of fulfilling experiences become real time and on demand, not just predictive, but actual execution on demand. I think that's what's going to be fueling the future. Obviously,
Yes, I
subject to legal, regulatory, politics, geography, whether having ice cream is going to be politically correct in the future and all of that considered.
Oh yes, of course. I think the tariffs did take everyone for a spin. I'm assuming you also were on the ride for a little bit.
Yeah.
Great. So I think we're almost at the end of the hour. I just have one question in conclusion, and this is more about you. So if I had to give you the ability to make a magic app, right? What would it be? In my case, it was if I had a music app that could generate music exactly in the way I wanted to, because I think I waste a lot of hours trying to find music that I actually enjoy listening to.
Wow. I've opened up so many sort of wish lists in my head. I think right now, if you could build me an app that helps me manage simple stuff like managing my emails and how I classify my emails so I can go back and look them up on demand, that would be miraculous for me. You see, this is the thing, right? You've got big stuff happening, right? You got progress you've made on robotics and voice driven co-pilots and all of these things, right? And I still struggle with managing my emails, putting them in the right
100%.
folder. And if you can give me an app that helps me manage my emails and convert them into actions that I can then sort of execute efficiently within the time allotted, that would be it.
I 100. I think opening my email on the morning after a long leave is my biggest nightmare. That is definitely my biggest nightmare. All
Uh,
right. Thank you so much for your time, Shayatan, today. It was
uh,
great having you. I think you shared a wealth of knowledge with us. So thank you so much.